The great hall of the Silver Peak Pack was suffocatingly, unnervingly quiet. It was the kind of silence that preceded a slaughter, thick with unspoken tension and the sharp, metallic scent of anxiety. Elara stood at the center of the cold obsidian floor, her delicate frame dwarfed by the towering ironwood pillars that held up the cavernous ceiling. She rested her hand subconsciously over her flat stomach, her thumb tracing small, soothing circles against the heavy silk of her emerald gown. The faint, fluttering heartbeat within her, barely a whisper of life, was the only warm thing in the massive, drafty cavern. She had come here to tell him. She had dressed in the finest silken robes of the Luna, practiced the words in the mirror until they tasted like sweet honey on her tongue. An heir, Kale. After 3 long years of empty nurseries, whispers, and pitying glances, we finally have an heir. But the joyous words she had rehearsed died in her throat the moment she looked up at the raised dais. Alpha King Kyle sat upon his massive throne of carved ironwood, looking more like a statue of a ruthless warlord than the gentle mate who had kissed her forehead just hours before. His posture was rigidly straight, his broad shoulders squared beneath his dark winter mantle. His jaw was clenched so tightly that the muscles jumped visibly beneath his pale, aristocratic skin. Beside him stood Elder Morvan, the head of the Traditionalist Council, his wrinkled face a deeply carved mask of smug, pious triumph. And slightly behind the elder stood Lady Vanya of the Blackwood Pack. She was draped in predatory crimson, her dark hair tumbling over her shoulders in perfect waves, her full, painted lips curled into a faint, knowing, and utterly venomous smile. "You summoned me, my king," Elara said. She forced her voice to remain steady, projecting it across the echoing hall, despite the icy dread that was rapidly pooling in her veins. She could feel the eyes of hundreds of pack members boring into her back, their collective breath held in anticipation. Kyle wouldn't meet her eyes. His gaze was fixed stubbornly on the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall, aggressively avoiding the woman he had sworn to love before the moon goddess. When he finally spoke, his voice echoed, deep and resonant, yet strangely hollow, stripped of all the warmth she had come to know. "The winter has been brutal, Elara," he began, the words sounding rehearsed, as if they were being dragged out of him with rusted hooks. "Our borders are failing. The rogue incursions in the south have tripled in the last moon cycle alone. The pack is starving, the storehouses are dwindling, and the council requires strong, unyielding leadership to guide us through the dark. I am acutely aware of our struggles, Kyle," Elara replied, taking a hesitant step forward, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. "Which is exactly why I came to tell you." Silence. Elder Morvan stepped forward, the heavy iron ferrule of his cane striking the polished stone floor with a sharp, echoing crack. "The king is speaking, Elara of the Human Lands." The deliberate use of her birth title was a calculated, vicious strike. It was a reminder to everyone in the room of her greatest shame. She wasn't human. She had pure wolf blood running through her veins, tracing back to an ancient, forgotten lineage. But she had never shifted. 3 years as the crowned queen, and she remained a wolfless oddity, a point of endless, bitter contention among the traditionalist elders who believed a king needed a warrior mate, not a fragile human doll. Kyle finally, agonizingly, looked down at her. His striking, icy blue eyes, which were usually so warm and full of devotion when they were alone behind closed doors, were completely flat. Dead. There was a terrifying emptiness in them that made Elara's blood run cold. "The pack requires an alpha pair capable of defending it," Kale said, each word sounding forced, as if he were chewing on broken glass. "A king and a queen who can shift, who can lead the vanguard in the snow, who can forge military alliances through pure strength. The Blackwood Pack has offered 300 seasoned warriors, a limitless supply of grain, and a secure trade route to the Eastern Sea. Ilara's heart skipped a beat, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of her neck. And what do they want in return for such generosity? A union, Lady Vanya purred, stepping forward with liquid grace to rest a manicured, ruby-ringed hand on the arm of Kael's throne. She looked down at Ilara with undisguised pity. My father, the Alpha of Blackwood, requires my ascension to Queen to solidify the treaty. Blood for blood, crown for crown, the massive hall held its collective breath. Then, the whispers began. They hissed through the shadows of the pillars like a pit of vipers, eager to feast on the blood of the fallen queen. Kael, Ilara breathed, her carefully maintained composure finally fracturing. Her voice cracked, betraying her devastation. She looked at the man who had held her the night before, who had whispered against her skin that they would weather the winter together, just as they always did. Kael, please. What is she talking about? Kael stood up. His massive frame dominated the room, casting a long, dark shadow over the dais. He looked down at her, and for a fraction of a second, Ilara saw it. A flash of raw, agonizing torment tearing through his icy facade. But he blinked, his jaw hardening, and the vulnerability vanished behind the impenetrable, ruthless wall of an alpha king. You have been a kind and dutiful companion, Ilara, Kael projected, pitching his voice so that it boomed off the vaulted ceilings for the entire pack to hear. But in these dark times, kindness is a luxury the Silver Peak cannot afford. You possess no wolf. You bring no military advantage to our borders. You cannot protect our people. As a queen, you are utterly useless to the crown's future. The word struck her like a physical, devastating blow to the chest. Useless. A collective gasp rippled through the massive audience. Someone laughed in the back, a sharp, cruel sound that belonged to one of Vanya's cronies. Ilara felt the burning heat of absolute humiliation rise to her cheeks, scorching away the shock and leaving behind a terrifying, hollow clarity. She pressed her hand harder against her stomach, her nails digging into the silk of her dress. The tiny, fragile life inside her suddenly felt like a heavy, dangerous anchor. You are stripping me of my title? She asked, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, trembling whisper. I am stepping you down to the status of favored consort, Kael said, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the armrest of his throne, as if bracing himself against a hurricane. You will be provided for. You will want for nothing. But Vanya will be crowned queen at the next full moon. It is the only way to save the pack from annihilation. Favored consort, a mistress, a hidden, shameful thing kept in the shadows while another woman ruled beside him in the light. He was offering her a gilded cage. I see, Ilara said. The tears she expected to cry, the hysterical sobs that the court was waiting for, simply didn't come. Instead, a cold, diamond-hard resolve solidified in the center of her chest. She looked at Vanya's triumphant sneer. She looked at Elder Morvan's gloating, hateful eyes. And finally, she looked at Kael. The man she loved had chosen politics over his mate. He had chosen the council's fear over his faith in her. If she told him about the baby right now, in front of the entire court, everything would change. He would keep her. He would fight for the child. But he would lock her in a tower to protect the heir, forever parading her as nothing more than an incubator, while Vanya wore the crown and commanded the army. She would never, ever subject her child to a life in this poisoned, treacherous court. Very well, Alpha Kael, Ilara said, her spine snapping perfectly straight. She reached up to the nape of her neck and unclasped the heavy silver moon amulet of the Luna. She held it out for a moment, letting the moonlight catch it before letting it drop. It hit the obsidian floor with a sharp, musical clatter that echoed through the dead silence of the hall. "May the goddess grant you the rain you so desperately deserve," Alara whispered. Before Kale could speak, before he could reach out his hand to stop her, Alara turned her back on the king, walked down the long aisle of the great hall, and walked out into the winter storm, knowing she would rather die than ever return. The winter storm broke exactly as Alara reached the heavy oak doors of her private chambers. Violent thunder rattled the stained glass windows, mirroring the chaotic, deafening storm fracturing her own mind. She didn't weep. There was absolutely no time for tears. Grief was a luxury for the safe, and she was no longer safe in the Silver Peak. She moved with mechanical, frantic precision, falling to her knees to pull a worn, water-resistant leather duffel from beneath the grand mahogany bed. It was the same bag she had brought with her 3 years ago when she first arrived as a hopeful bride. Now, it would be the bag she used to flee. She packed only the absolute necessities, her hands trembling as she pulled open the ornate oak dressers. Thermal clothing, heavy hunting boots lined with fur, a small satchel of dried salted meat from her private pantry, and a heavy velvet pouch containing the remaining gold coins from her personal dowry. She walked past the open wardrobe, ignoring the racks of shimmering silks, the velvet cloaks, and the delicate lace gowns Kyle had gifted her. She left the jewel box open on the vanity, the diamonds and sapphires winking uselessly in the dim candlelight. She systematically stripped herself of every single thing the Alpha King had ever given her, refusing to carry his memory into the wilderness. Useless. His voice echoed relentlessly in her mind, a phantom blade twisting cruelly between her ribs. A favored consort. She paused by the tall, silver-backed mirror, pressing both hands to her flat abdomen. Her reflection looked pale, haunted, but her eyes blazed with a fierce, protective, maternal fire. "We don't need him," she whispered to the quiet room, her voice trembling but resolute. "You are not a political bargaining chip. You are not a pawn to secure a border. You are mine, and I will protect you." She threw on a dark, heavy, waterproof cloak, pulling the deep hood up to shadow her face, and slipped out through the narrow, winding servants' corridors. The entire castle was in an uproar. She could hear the muffled, frantic voices of the pack echoing through the stone walls, gossiping wildly about the king's brutal, unprecedented public dismissal of his mate. The distraction was her only shield. With the guards distracted by the chaos in the great hall and the escalating storm outside, the security around the inner keep was shockingly lax. She reached the rusted iron gates of the eastern postern, slipping past a pair of drowsy, complaining guards who were far more focused on huddling near their brazier to escape the torrential, freezing rain than watching the shadows. Freedom was a mere 100 yards away. All she had to do was cross the muddy, exposed bailey and reach the dense, protective tree line of the Whispering Woods. "You won't survive the night in the wilds, Alara. The temperature is dropping fast and the rogues are starving." Alara froze, her breath catching in her throat. A tall, broad-shouldered figure stepped out from the deep alcove of the stone wall, the cherry-red tip of a cigarette glowing faintly in the gloom. It was Ronan, Kyle's younger, estranged brother. Unlike Kyle's golden-blonde, regal perfection, Ronan was dark-haired, covered in jagged scars, highly cynical, and notoriously distant from the king's inner circle. He was a rogue who lived on the edges of the pack, preferring the company of the forest to the politics of the court. Alara pulled her hood tighter, her heart hammering as her hand slipped to the cold hilt of the silver dagger at her belt. "Are you going to stop me, Ronan? Are you going to drag me back by my hair to be your brother's humiliated, caged concubine?" Ronan didn't move to attack. He simply stood there, rain matting his dark hair to his forehead, and took a slow, deliberate drag of his cigarette. His sharp, amber eyes scanned her pale face, dropping to her travel bag, and then lingering on her trembling hand resting near her stomach. "Kyle is a fool," Ronan said softly, his voice barely audible over the roaring rain. A cornered, desperate, incredibly stupid fool. He dropped the cigarette onto the wet cobblestones and crushed it beneath the heel of his heavy boot. The elders have been threatening a full-scale mutiny for months. They deliberately starved the outer territories to force Kale's hand into marrying Vanya. He thinks stripping your title protects you from their daily assassination attempts. Ilara blinked, the freezing rain matting her eyelashes, struggling to process his words. He humiliated me? To save me? He has the emotional intelligence of a brick, Ilara. Ronan scoffed quietly, stepping closer so he didn't have to shout. He thinks removing the crown from your head removes the target from your back. He intends to keep you locked in the Western Tower under heavy guard once Vanya is crowned. He thinks you'll eventually understand that he did it out of love. I am not a pet to be caged for my own good. She spat, her anger reigniting with a white-hot fury. And I refuse to share the man I mated with. If he thinks I will sit quietly while Vanya warms his bed and rules his kingdom, he doesn't know me at all. I know, Ronan said, his harsh features softening with unexpected sympathy. He stepped forward and shoved a heavy, sealed canvas bag into her arms. Which is exactly why I'm helping you leave. There are scent-masking herbs in here, dried rations, and a detailed map to the neutral territories. Follow the Blackwater River. Don't stop running until you cross the Obsidian border. Ilara stared down at the survival pack, utterly stunned. Why are you doing this? If Kale finds out you aided my escape, he will banish you, because my brother needs to learn that his actions have brutal consequences. Ronan said grimly. And because... Ronan's amber eyes dropped pointedly to her stomach for a fraction of a second before flicking away. He was the pack's greatest tracker. His nose was unparalleled. He knew. Because the Silver Peak is a nest of vipers, and it is no place to raise a child right now. Go. Before I change my mind and mind my own business. A massive surge of gratitude flooded her chest. She gave him a short, fierce nod, turning her back on the castle and plunging toward the dark trees. She ran into the pitch-black darkness of the whispering woods, praying the heavy rain would wash away her tracks and mask her scent. She thought she was safe. She thought she had outsmarted them, until 3 hours later, the deep, bone-chilling, terrifying howl of a hunting horn echoed through the forest behind her. It wasn't the deep, booming note of Kale's royal guard. The note was dissonant, high-pitched, and cruel. It was the hunting call of the Elder's personal assassins. And they were right on her scent. Ilara tore blindly through the dense, unforgiving underbrush of the whispering woods. Jagged thorns tore at her heavy cloak, slicing through the fabric and scratching deep, bleeding lines across her cheeks and hands. Her lungs burned as though she were breathing in freezing fire with every desperate gasp, and the relentless, driving rain had turned the forest floor into a slick, treacherous trap of mud and hidden roots. Behind her, the hunting horn sounded again. It was closer this time. Much closer. Panic, primal and raw, clawed viciously at her throat. She pushed herself harder, forcing her legs to pump faster. But something was terribly wrong. Her limbs felt strangely leaden, as if she were trying to run through deep water. It wasn't just the early stages of pregnancy or the sheer physical exhaustion of running for 3 hours in a storm. A familiar, sickening lethargy was creeping slowly up her spine. It was a heavy, suffocating numbness that she had been feeling off and on for the past 6 months. A weakness she had attributed to the constant stress of the royal court. She stumbled over an exposed, moss-slicked root and crashed violently into the freezing mud. She gasped, the impact driving the air from her lungs. She placed her palms flat in the mud, trying to push herself back to her feet. But her arms trembled so violently, they simply gave out. As she lay there panting, a sharp, metallic taste of copper flooded the back of her mouth. In that terrifying moment of stillness, a horrifying realization dawned on her. The morning tea. Every single day for the past 6 months, Elder Morvan's personal, trusted servant had brought her a special, steaming herbal brew in a delicate porcelain cup. The servant had smiled warmly, claiming it was a traditional, ancient fertility tonic specifically designed for wolfless lunas to help them conceive an alpha heir. Alara had choked it down every morning, desperate to give Kale a child. She remembered the faint, slightly bitter aftertaste of anise. It hadn't been a tonic at all. It was wolfsbane root. They had been microdosing her, slowly, meticulously poisoning her day by day. They were keeping her artificially weak, suppressing her immune system, preventing her dormant, hidden wolf from ever surfacing, and ensuring she appeared frail, sickly, and utterly useless to the pack. Kyle had seen her failing health and assumed the pressure of the crown was killing her. He hadn't realized his own counsel was murdering her right under his nose. "Over here, I smell fresh blood on the thorns." A rough, guttural voice shouted through the trees to her left. Alara scrambled desperately to her feet, her vision swimming with dark spots as the exertion caused the latent wolfsbane in her bloodstream to flare up. She couldn't fight them. She couldn't outrun them, not with the poison acting up under the extreme physical stress. She limped forward, dragging her heavy right leg, breaking through a thicket of towering pine trees. But instead of an escape route, she found herself standing on the edge of a jagged, rocky precipice. The Blackwater River raged 50 feet below her, a churning, violent mass of white-capped rapids and lethal dark stone. There was no bridge. There was nowhere left to run. 3 massive wolves broke through the tree line behind her, their jaws slavering. The moment they saw her cornered, they shifted seamlessly back into their human forms. They were large, brutal mercenaries, their bare chests bearing the jagged, branded scar of the Blackwood pack. These weren't the Elder's assassins. These were Vanya's men. The leader, a massive brute with a missing left eye and a face mapped with battle scars, smirked as he drew a long, serrated hunting knife from his thigh sheath. "Well, well, well," the mercenary mocked, taking a slow, menacing step forward. "The useless Luna. You led us on quite a chase, little bird. Lady Vanya sends her warmest regards. She wanted to make absolutely sure there were no loose ends before the wedding ceremony. If you touch me, King Kale will hunt you down and skin you alive." Alara rasped, taking a slow step backward until the heels of her boots hung perilously over the edge of the abyss. Pebbles skittered down into the roaring water below. The mercenary threw his head back and laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "The king thinks you ran away into the woods in a pathetic fit of jealousy. When he finds your broken, mangled body washed up at the bottom of the gorge tomorrow morning, he'll assume you slipped in the rain, a tragic, heartbreaking accident. Now hold still. I promise I'll make it quick." He lunged forward, the serrated blade glinting in the moonlight. Alara didn't scream. She didn't drop to her knees and beg for her life. She looked the killer dead in his remaining eye, placed a fiercely protective hand over her stomach, and made the only impossible choice she had left. She stepped backward into the empty air. The wind roared deafeningly in her ears as she plummeted, the mercenary's shocked curse echoing faintly above her. Time seemed to slow as the black water rushed up to meet her. She hit the icy river with a bone-shattering, agonizing impact. The breath was violently driven from her lungs, and the freezing, violent current immediately dragged her under into the dark. But right before the darkness completely claimed her consciousness, right as her heart began to slow, a strange, burning heat erupted deep within the center of her chest. It was a primal, ancient, unyielding spark of magic that simply refused to be extinguished. Alara awoke to the sharp, metallic scent of ozone, the comforting smell of burning cedarwood, and the heavy, oppressive aura of incredibly dark magic. She gasped, her eyes flying open as she instinctively curled into a defensive ball. She wasn't drowning in the freezing river. She was lying on a plush, crimson velvet chaise lounge in a massive room made entirely of dark, polished obsidian stone. A roaring fire and a grand hearth cast dancing, ominous shadows across the high, vaulted ceilings. Her wet, freezing clothes had been removed and replaced by a soft, dry woolen tunic, and a thick, medicinal bandage was wrapped tightly around her aching ribs. Careful. I wouldn't move too quickly if I were you. You have 3 fractured ribs, severe hypothermia, and enough concentrated wolfsbane lingering in your system to kill a full-grown alpha twice over. Ilara flinched violently, snapping her gaze to the dark corner of the room. A man sat casually in a high-backed leather wing chair, lazily swirling a glass of dark amber liquid. He was strikingly, almost terrifyingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features carved from pale marble, hair the color of midnight ink, and eyes that glowed with a predatory, luminous violet hue. He exuded an aura of absolute, terrifying power that made Ilara's skin prickle. She knew him instantly from the War Council maps and Kael's furious rants. Alpha Darius of the Obsidian Pack, King Kael's most hated bloodthirsty rival, the undisputed ruler of the desolate northern wastes. You pulled me from the river, Ilara said, her voice a raspy, painful whisper. She gritted her teeth and forced herself into a sitting position, refusing to show weakness, ignoring the sharp, stabbing pain in her chest. My border patrols found you washed up on our riverbanks, half dead and blue in the face, Darius said, rising from the chair with a fluid, lethal grace that spoke of immense predatory power. He walked slowly toward her, his heavy boots making no sound on the rugs, and set his glass on a silver side table. Imagine my utter surprise when my top healers reported they had salvaged the recently discarded, wolfless mate of King Kael. A woman deemed so entirely worthless, she was thrown away like garbage for the Blackwood whore. Then Vanya is not the queen yet. Ilara shot back instinctively, her eyes narrowing. Then she immediately bit the inside of her cheek. Why in the world was she defending Kael's treacherous court? Darius chuckled, a dark, velvety sound that vibrated in the room. Loyal to a fault. How utterly tragic. Tell me, Ilara, why were Blackwood assassins chasing you onto my sovereign lands? I thought Vanya's father was offering Kael a grand military alliance, not a hit squad to clean up his messes. Ilara's mind raced frantically, trying to calculate the political angles. If Darius knew Vanya was trying to assassinate her, he knew there was a severe fracture in Kael's supposed new alliance. Vanya is incredibly power-hungry and paranoid, Ilara stated coldly. She wanted to ensure I couldn't return to the capital and contest her claim to the throne. Liar, Darius said softly. Before she could blink, he leaned over her, his massive hands gripping the arms of the chaise lounge, trapping her. His glowing violet eyes locked onto hers, seeming to strip away all her mental defenses. He leaned in closer, his face inches from hers, and inhaled deeply near the crook of her neck. Ilara stiffened, her heart pounding, trying to pull away. But he caught her chin gently but firmly with 2 fingers, holding her still. Darius closed his eyes, his nostrils flaring slightly as he processed her scent. When he opened his eyes again, the mocking amusement was completely gone. It was replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp calculation. A wolfsbane is a clever poison. It masks a great many things, Darius murmured, his thumb brushing lightly against her jawline. But it cannot completely mask the distinct, potent scent of royal alpha blood mingling with your own. Vanya didn't want you dead because you were a rival for Kael's bed. She wanted you dead because you are carrying the true, legitimate heir to the Silver Peak throne. Ilara's breath hitched loudly in the quiet room. She violently yanked her face away from his grip, her hands flying to cover her stomach. If you intend to use my unborn child as a bargaining chip to extort Kale, I swear to the goddess I will find a way to kill you myself. A wolfless human threatening a supreme alpha in his own fortress. Darius mused, standing back up and smoothing his dark tunic. I truly admire your spirit, little bird. It's a shame Kale was too blind to see it. But you misunderstand my intentions entirely. I don't need your unborn child to destroy Kale. He walked leisurely to the heavy iron door of the chamber, glancing back over his shoulder with a chilling, predatory smile. Yvonnya isn't allying with Kyle. She's allied with me. Blackwood is setting a massive trap at the western gates, and your foolish, love-struck king is walking right into the slaughter. And you, my dear, are going to be my highly valued front-row guest to the end of the Silver Peak line. The heavy iron door slammed shut with a resounding boom, the lock grinding heavily into place from the outside. Alara was trapped in the heart of enemy territory, and Kale was walking into an ambush. King Kyle paced the grand war room like a caged, starved beast. It had been 3 days since Alara vanished into the winter storm. 3 agonizing, endless days of deafening silence, torrential rain, and a growing, gnawing terror in the pit of his gut that he had made the most catastrophic, unforgivable mistake of his entire life. We found her cloak snagged on the brambles near the Blackwater ravine, my king. Kale stopped dead in his tracks, whirling around to face his lead tracker. The seasoned warrior looked terrified, his hands trembling as he held out the sodden, torn fabric of Alara's dark, waterproof cloak. There was a large, dark, unmistakable stain near the hem. Blood. Kale's vision swam, the edges of the room turning a hazy, violent red. A low, guttural, terrifying growl ripped from the depths of his throat, the sheer force of it rattling the heavy parchment maps on the war table. His inner wolf, usually so tightly disciplined and controlled, was thrashing wildly against his ribs, howling in agonizing grief for its missing mate. You drove her away, the voice in his head screamed. You broke her heart to save her from the council, and instead, you drove her right to her death. We found something else, sire, the tracker said nervously, taking a quick step back to avoid the king's radiating fury. He reached into his pouch and placed a crushed silver flask gently on the table. This was dropped in the mud near the site of the struggle. It bears the distinct crest of the Blackwood pack. Elder Morven, standing comfortably near the roaring fireplace, cleared his throat dismissively. A mere coincidence, surely, my king. Blackwood mercenaries often patrol the neutral zones to hunt rogues. She likely slipped in the mud and fell. Before the elder could finish his vile, dismissive sentence, Kale crossed the massive room in a terrifying blur of motion. His massive hand clamped brutally around Morvan's frail throat, lifting the elder clean off the stone floor. Morvan's cane clattered uselessly away. The war room guards instinctively drew their swords at the sudden violence, but Ronan, standing casually by the door, barked a sharp, authoritative command, and they immediately stood down, sheathing their weapons. You told me bringing Vanya here was the only way to secure the borders and feed our people. Kyle snarled, his eyes bleeding rapidly from their usual icy blue into the glowing, dominant gold of his furious alpha wolf. His voice was a demonic rumble. You told me if I publicly stripped Alara of her title, your traditionalist factions would be satisfied and call off their hounds. You swore on your life she would be safe in the Western Tower. She ran. She defied you. It was out of my hands. Morvan gasped, his face rapidly turning a mottled, ugly purple as his legs kicked weakly in the air. Ronan stepped forward from the shadows, his face an emotionless mask, and threw a thick, heavy leather ledger onto the map table. It landed with a loud thud, Save your breath, Kale. He's lying. Ronan said coldly. I raided Morvan's private apothecary an hour ago when I noticed discrepancies in the royal treasury. He wasn't just threatening Alara politically. He's been purchasing massive, untraceable quantities of wolfsbane root from the black market for the last 6 months. They were poisoning her, brother. Slowly. Every single day. Keeping her weak so the pack would view her as a burden. Kale's eyes widened in sheer horror. He dropped the elder like a sack of dead stones. Morvan collapsed to the floor, gasping and coughing violently, clutching his bruised throat, poisoned. The constant lethargy, her increasingly pale skin, the deep, unexplained sadness in her eyes. Kyle had arrogantly thought the immense pressure of the court and his own distant behavior was breaking her spirit. He hadn't realized his own trusted counsel was slowly, methodically murdering the woman he loved, right under his own roof. He had called her useless before the entire pack while she was fighting a silent, agonizing daily battle just to stay alive. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the war room slammed open, shattering the tense silence. A messenger, battered, bleeding, and utterly exhausted, fell to his knees on the stone floor. "On my king, a missive from the Obsidian Pack. Alpha Darius has crossed the northern border with a massive legion." Kale snatched the wax-sealed parchment from the trembling messenger's hand. He ripped the black seal open, his glowing golden eyes scanning the elegant, mocking, cursive script. "King Kale, your lovely betrothed. Lady Vanya has graciously opened your western gates to my advancing army. Your kingdom falls tonight. As a gesture of supreme mercy, I offer you a trade. Surrender your crown to me unconditionally, and I will return your rejected mate and the royal pup she carries within her, unharmed. Come to the Blackwood Plains alone, or sit in your castle and watch them both burn. Alpha Darius." The heavy parchment crumpled into dust in Kyle's massive fist. The royal pup. He couldn't breathe. He was going to be a father. And the woman he loved, the woman he had publicly humiliated and failed to protect, was heavily pregnant and sitting in the dungeon of his greatest, most sadistic enemy. "Sound the war horns," Kyle whispered, his voice dropping from a furious roar to a terrifying, deadly calm that promised rivers of blood. He turned to Ronan. "Execute Morvan immediately. Throw Vanya's remaining guards in the dungeon, and muster every single wolf in Silver Peak who can hold a sword. We march on Obsidian tonight." In the damp, subterranean, pitch-black dungeons of the Obsidian stronghold, Alara felt like she was burning alive from the inside out. She lay curled tightly on the cold, unforgiving stone floor of her cell, clutching her stomach with both arms. The micro-dosed wolfsbane was finally working its way out of her system, and the withdrawal was agonizingly, violently brutal. Her bones felt as though they were splintering into a million pieces beneath her skin. A terrifying fever raged through her blood, so intense she was completely drenched in sweat and could barely draw a breath without screaming. "Hold on, little one," she whispered desperately to her stomach, her voice cracking, tears of pain leaking from her eyes. "I won't let the fire touch you. I promise you. Just hold on." The intense biological stress of the poison violently leaving her body, combined with the desperate, primal, overwhelming maternal instinct to protect her unborn child at all costs, was triggering something ancient within her DNA. Her fragile human blood was boiling away, evaporating to make room for a divine lineage that had been suppressed for 3 long, painful years. Outside her cell, high above ground, the massive stone fortress shook violently. The muffled, terrifying roar of open battle echoed down the winding stone corridors. The clash of steel, the deafening howls of wolves, and the screams of dying men vibrated through the floorboards. Kyle's army had arrived at the gates. Two massive obsidian guards rushed down the hall, pausing outside her heavy iron-barred door, their weapons drawn. Alpha Darius wants the human hostage brought up to the battlements immediately. One guard barked, panting heavily. Kyle has broken through the outer courtyard like a madman. He's butchering our vanguard. We need her as a meat shield to force a surrender. The guard aggressively slid the heavy iron key into the rusted lock. The door creaked open, revealing Alara trembling on the floor. "Get up on your feet, human." The guard sneered, stepping into the cell and reaching down roughly to grab her arm and haul her up. The absolute moment his rough hand clamped down on her skin, the fragile tether holding back her true nature snapped. Alara didn't scream. She roared. But it was a sound that absolutely didn't belong to a human throat. It was the sound of a mountain cracking in half, a primal, earth-shattering vibration of pure dominance. The heavy guard was thrown violently backward by an invisible force, slamming into the opposite stone wall of the corridor with a sickening, fatal crunch of bone. He fell to the ground, motionless. The second guard drew his broadsword with trembling hands, backing away. But he was far too late. The feverish fire in Alara's blood finally erupted. Her human skin tore, her bones cracked, expanded, and realigned in a split second of agonizing, blinding, terrifying ecstasy. The dark, damp cavern of the dungeon was suddenly bathed in a brilliant, blinding, luminescent white light, where the fragile, wolfless, broken queen had lain coughing just moments before. A massive, terrifyingly beautiful beast now stood. She was significantly larger than any normal alpha wolf. Her thick fur was not the standard gray, brown, or black, but a pure, radiant, shimmering silver that literally seemed to emit its own ethereal moonlight. Her eyes were massive pools of glowing liquid silver. The Silver Wolf, a mythical divine bloodline thought to have been entirely extinct for over 1,000 years. Her wolf hadn't been absent because she was defective. It had been so overwhelmingly, dangerously powerful that the daily wolfsbane had only just managed to keep it sedated. Now, awakened by the lethal threat to her pup, it was finally awake, and it was absolutely furious. The second guard dropped his heavy sword, the weapon clattering uselessly to the stone floor. He fell to his knees, his own inner wolf whining in absolute, primal terror and submission to the ancient deity standing before him. Alara didn't even grant him a second glance. She shattered the thick iron bars of her cell door outward with a single, casual swipe of her massive silver paw. She charged up the winding stone stairwell, her razor-sharp silver claws gouging deep trenches into the solid rock. She could smell the blood spilling in the courtyard above. She could smell the stench of Vanya's treason, and above it all, beneath the thick smoke, the sweat, and the ash, she could smell Kale. The grand courtyard of the obsidian stronghold had been transformed into an absolute slaughterhouse. Freezing rain lashed down relentlessly on the chaotic, bloody melee of snarling, shifting wolves and the deafening clash of heavy steel swords. Kale fought in his human form, his twin broadswords moving in a deadly, mesmerizing dance of flashing silver and spraying red. He was a terrifying force of nature, a god of war, cutting down any obsidian or blackwood wolf that dared cross his path. His face was streaked with mud and blood, his golden eyes glowing with a manic desperation to reach the dungeons. But he was hopelessly outnumbered. Vanya's ultimate betrayal had hit them brutally from behind, effectively trapping Kale's vanguard between Darius's heavy fortress defenses and the treacherous Blackwood mercenaries flanking their rear. "Darius!" Kyle roared over the deafening din of the battlefield, parrying a heavy axe blow and driving his hilt viciously into an attacker's face. "Face me, you coward! Bring her to me!" Alpha Darius stood safely above the fray on the raised stone balcony overlooking the courtyard, a cruel, satisfied smile playing on his lips. Beside him stood Lady Vanya, her beautiful crimson dress now stained with the splashing mud and blood of the battlefield she had created. "You are far too late, Kale," Darius called down, his voice magically amplified to carry over the fighting. "Your pathetic vanguard is broken. Your traitorous council is dead. And your lovely, useless mate is—" A massive, deafening explosion of stone and timber interrupted his gloating. The heavy, reinforced oak doors of the inner keep blew completely outward, splintering into thousands of lethal pieces that showered the courtyard. A collective, stunned silence instantly fell over the chaotic battlefield. Wolves on both sides literally stopped fighting mid-swing, dropping their weapons, their primal instincts absolutely paralyzing them as a creature straight out of myth stepped slowly out of the thick black smoke. The silver wolf stood in the center of the ruined courtyard, her massive coat glowing like a captured star against the dark, stormy night. The sheer, overwhelming, suffocating pressure of her alpha aura hit the courtyard like a physical shockwave, pushing hundreds of surrounding warriors completely to their knees, forcing their chins to the mud. It was a dominant, ancient magic that commanded absolute, unquestioning submission. Kyle slowly lowered his blood-stained swords, his chest heaving, his breath catching painfully in his throat. He recognized those beautiful eyes. He recognized the fierce, unbroken soul burning behind them. "Alara," he breathed, a complex mixture of absolute awe, profound relief, and crushing, suffocating shame washing over his battered body. Up on the high balcony, Vanya's face twisted in panicked, ugly fury. The useless human she had mocked and tried to murder was a walking legend incarnate. And worse, she was standing squarely between Kale and the remaining Obsidian army. "Kill her! Kill the beast now!" Vanya shrieked hysterically, violently snatching a heavy, loaded crossbow from the hands of a nearby Obsidian guard. She aimed the deadly weapon directly at the glowing chest of the silver wolf. The heavy iron bolt was tipped with a lethal dose of pure, concentrated liquid wolf's bane, a dose potent enough to kill even a creature of myth in seconds. Vanya pulled the trigger with a vicious sneer. The heavy bolt hissed through the freezing rain, cutting a deadly path aimed perfectly for Alara's heart. Alara, physically exhausted from the massive first shift and fiercely guarding her stomach, braced her body for the fatal impact. But it never came. A sudden blur of motion eclipsed her glowing vision. Kyle threw himself bodily through the air, leaping directly into the deadly path of the bolt. The sickening wet thwack of the metal piercing deep into flesh echoed loudly across the eerily quiet courtyard. Kyle grunted heavily, the sheer momentum of the heavy bolt spinning him around. He crashed violently to the muddy ground, the poisoned bolt buried deep in his left shoulder, mere millimeters from his heart. Alara let out a deafening, heartbroken, unearthly howl that shattered the glass in the surrounding windows. The silver wolf lunged forward, ignoring Vanya completely, and threw herself toward her fallen king. She shifted mid-leap, landing gracefully beside Kale in her human form, completely ignoring her own nakedness and the freezing rain lashing against her skin. "Kale!" she screamed, dropping to her knees in the mud and pressing her hands desperately against the horrific wound. Thick, black veins were already spreading rapidly outward from the entry point, the highly concentrated poison working to stop his heart instantly. Kale reached up with a violently trembling, blood-stained hand, his fingers gently brushing her rain-soaked, tear-streaked cheek. His brilliant golden eyes were dimming rapidly, the life draining out of him. "I'm so sorry," he choked out, dark blood bubbling past his pale lips. "I was a fool, my love. I just wanted you safe. Forgive me." His heavy hand fell limp to the mud, his eyes rolling back into his head as his massive chest stopped moving. No, Kale, you don't get to die to escape what you did to me." Alara sobbed, her tears finally falling freely, mixing with the freezing rain and the hot blood pooling in the mud. The entire battlefield was frozen in place. Even the sadistic Alpha Darius stood immobilized on his balcony by the sheer, commanding, suffocating grief radiating from the kneeling Silver Queen. Elara squeezed her eyes shut, desperately tapping into the ancient, pulsating, divine energy she now knew lived within the core of her being. The Silver Wolf wasn't just a brutal warrior designed for slaughter. It was a pure conduit of life and healing. She pressed both of her palms flat over Kyle's still heart. A brilliant, blinding, searing white light erupted from beneath her hands, pushing forcefully back against the dark, creeping veins of the deadly poison. She poured her physical strength, her newly awakened magic, and her stubborn, unyielding will to save the father of her child directly into his shattered body. With a violent, shuddering gasp, Kyle's chest heaved upward. His eyes snapped open, suddenly glowing a vibrant, fully restored golden hue. He violently coughed up a mouthful of black blood, the poison neutralizing and burning away, completely within his veins. He stared up at Elara, his chest rising and falling rapidly. Awe, profound adoration, and deep disbelief were naked on his handsome face. You saved my life." Elara sat back heavily on her heels, the silver healing light slowly fading from her trembling hands. The relief she felt that he was alive was immense, almost overwhelming. But as she looked down at the king, the vivid, painful memory of the great hall rushed back with terrifying clarity. The public humiliation, the cold dismissal, the feeling of dropping her amulet on the floor. He had taken a bolt for her today, yes. He had been willing to die for her. But he had broken her heart and shattered her trust first. Kale struggled painfully to his knees, ignoring the mud, and reached out a trembling hand for hers. "Elara, please, hear me. I was manipulated. I thought removing your crown would make the council spare your life. I didn't know they were poisoning you every day. I swear to the goddess, I didn't know about our pup." "And if you had known?" Elara asked, her voice turning incredibly cold and steady, carrying clearly across the silent, listening courtyard. She didn't take his hand. "Would you have kept me locked safely away in a tower? A prized hidden breeder while Vanya wore my crown and ruled my people? Would you have ever trusted me enough to fight beside me, Kale? Or just enough to hide me in the dark?" Kale flinched violently, closing his eyes. The absolute truth of her words cut far deeper than the poisoned bolt ever could. "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice thick with shame. Slowly, deliberately, the great Alpha King of Silver Peak bowed his head, pressing his forehead directly into the bloody mud at her bare feet. He bared the back of his neck to her. It was the ultimate, undisputed gesture of total submission from an Alpha King. "I am your king no longer," Kyle declared, his voice ringing with absolute sincerity. "I am your servant. I am your personal guard. Whatever you will have me be. I beg only for your forgiveness, Elara, not your return to my bed." Elara looked down at the massive, powerful man kneeling in the dirt before her. She loved him. She always had, and perhaps she always would. But love was simply not enough to rule a dangerous kingdom. Respect was required. Absolute equality was required. She stood up slowly. A heavy, warm fur cloak was suddenly tossed gently over her bare shoulders by Ronan, who had fought his way through the stunned crowd to reach the front lines. Elara pulled the thick cloak tight around her, gathering her dignity. She looked up at the stone balcony. Alpha Darius had wisely, silently retreated into the shadows of his keep. Realizing his entire war was lost at the exact moment the Silver Wolf appeared. Vanya, however, was currently cornered and being bound in heavy iron chains by furious Silver Peak guards. "I will not return to Silver Peak to be your favored consort," Elara said, her voice ringing with the absolute, unyielding authority of a true queen. I will not return to be a silent Luna, hiding behind her king while he makes choices for my life. Kyle looked up from the mud, tears mingling freely with the rain on his handsome face. Name your terms. Anything. The Traditionalist Council is abolished permanently, Alara demanded, her eyes flashing silver. Vanya faces the executioner's block at dawn for high treason. And I do not sit slightly behind you, Kale. I sit equal to you. We rule this pack together, side by side, as Alpha King and Alpha Queen, or I walk away into the woods right now, and you will never see me or your heir again. Kale didn't hesitate for a single second. He looked up at her with pure, unadulterated worship. Done. It is yours. My life, my crown, my pack. They are all yours, my queen. 1 month later, the great hall of the Silver Peak Pack was completely transformed. It was bathed in warm, brilliant golden sunlight pouring through the newly cleaned stained glass windows. The oppressive, freezing, paranoid atmosphere of the past 3 years was completely gone. The single massive heavy ironwood throne on the dais had been violently chopped into firewood, replaced by 2 perfectly matching, beautifully carved thrones made of white weirwood. The grand hall was packed to the absolute brim. But this time, there were no vicious whispers hiding in the shadows. There were no cruel sneers or judging eyes. There was only absolute, reverent, awestruck silence. Kyle stood proudly at the base of the dais, dressed in his finest ceremonial silver armor. He looked healthy, vibrant, and incredibly strong, his golden eyes completely focused with burning devotion on the heavy oak doors at the back of the hall. The massive doors swung slowly open. Alara walked down the long center aisle. She wore a stunning, flowing gown of spun silver, the delicate fabric shimmering and moving like liquid moonlight with every step she took. Her stomach was now visibly, beautifully rounded, carrying the undeniable, proud proof of the royal Silver Peak heir. But it was not the unborn child the pack was staring at. It was the undeniable, suffocatingly powerful, majestic aura of the silver wolf that rolled off her with every confident step. She walked with the grace of a predator and the dignity of a goddess. She was no longer the fragile, easily broken human girl from the borderlands. She was the most powerful, respected being in the entire room, and everyone knew it. As she gracefully reached the dais, Kale stepped down to meet her on the floor. He didn't offer his hand to lead her up, acting as her guide. Instead, he waited patiently for her to step up onto the dais entirely beside him. People of Silver Peak. Kale's voice boomed, clear, resonant, and filled with deep emotion. Exactly 1 month ago, I stood in this very hall and made the greatest, most foolish mistake an alpha could ever make. I valued pack politics over true loyalty. I valued the council's fear over my faith in my mate. I called my wife useless, entirely blind to the fact that she was, and always has been, the very beating heart of this pack. Kale turned to Alara, completely ignoring the crowd. His eyes shone with unshed tears and deep, hard-earned respect. He reached into the velvet pouch at his belt and pulled out the heavy silver moon amulet. The exact same amulet she had dropped on this very floor in her darkest hour. I do not ask you to submit to me ever again, Alara, Kyle said softly. His voice meant for her ears alone, though the silent hall heard every word. I ask you to lead with me. Teach me how to be the king you deserve. He gently, reverently fastened the heavy silver amulet around her neck, letting it rest over her collarbone. Then, Kyle took a deliberate step back and, once again, dropped proudly to one knee before the entire pack. The crowd gasped at the sight of their king bowing. And then, starting from the front row and rippling backward like a massive wave, the entire Silver Peak pack dropped to their knees, bowing their heads in ultimate respect to their new, undisputed Alpha Queen. Elara looked down at the proud man she loved, who had finally learned the true, vulnerable meaning of strength. She rested her hand gently on her rounded stomach, feeling a strong, reassuring flutter kick against her palm. She had survived the daily poison, the brutal betrayal, and the terrifying fall. She had found her legendary wolf in the darkness, and in doing so, she had forged a king truly worthy of standing beside her in the light. "Rise, Kale," Elara said, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceilings with the quiet, absolute power of a legend reborn. "We have a kingdom to rebuild." Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the expanded details of Elara's journey from a misunderstood Luna to a legendary Silver Queen, please consider leaving a like, dropping a comment to let me know your favorite plot twist, and sharing this story with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe for more intense, emotional Alpha King romances.